After waking up and thinking where I wanted to paint for my day 2 of the adventure, I decided on a prime spot. It's the largest of the lakes at the state park, called the Mac Lake. It's not where I originally intended to paint, but had to make a change of plans. I've painted here before, but a slightly different view in a different painting medium. This time I'm choosing to paint using my watercolor kit and also returning back to my 300-pound watercolor paper. To prevent warping, I staple it onto a piece of thin wood that would fit on the easel. I'm again using my new aluminum travel easel to lighten the load. I'm back out here at the Mac Lake, which is one of the biggest lakes in the state park. It's not the original place that I wanted to go and paint, but due to time constraints, I wasn't able to hike out to the metal pond, which is kind of like a hidden gem of the park, but I'll get to that another day. This is the original place where I painted at before, and I decided to do it again because last time I did it in acrylic, but this time I'm going to be focused on doing it on watercolor. Also, I'm not using the watercolor canvas like I did yesterday, but instead I went back to the trusty old 300-pound watercolor paper. After doing my initial sketch just to have an outline of the land and water shapes, I jump into painting. I'm again returning to my emerald blue for my sky hue. I like it because it's not as dark as my Prussian blue and not too light as my cobalt blue. I've also pre-wet the sky area so that when I'm dropping in my wash, the pigment will move around and I'll leave spots open for the cloud indicators. I'm working my way from the background to the foreground. Next, I begin to focus on the far-off tree line that seems to sit on the horizon. I'm allowing the blue and the vertigreen to mix so that there's a fuzzy line to it and not a hard edge shape. This gives an indicator it's further in the distance. I use a yellow ochre wash for the vegetation that's sitting on the banks of the lake. There'll be more colors later due to the variety of the plants on the shore, but for now, I'm just trying to cover the whites of the paper. I spray the paper to allow this vegetation and the water hues to mix. I'm using the same emerald blue for the lake as I did the sky, as the water is just a reflection of what's around it. My daughter always asks why my paintings are better than hers. Besides the obvious reason I'm considerably older and more experienced, I always show her the color. I believe one of the differences between a younger artist's work and an older artist's work is a color and how they apply it. The younger artist will apply a flat color, but an older artist will see all the colors in a single area and apply those. That's one of the joys I get out of watercolor. Now that I got the initial wash down and I got all the white out of the watercolor paper, now it's time to go and start to add in some initial details. First I'm going to start with the far off trees in the distance and work my way up. The beauty of these trees that appear to be sitting on the horizon line is a multitude of colors mixing in amongst them. I use a mixture of greens, purples, and siennas to show these variations. There's not going to be a big difference in their heights as they are far away and just appear to be a shape. We don't yet see the individual trees. As I'm applying the paint, I'm making sure to apply each color to the next one before they dry so that they have time to kind of mix and blend together. I'm going back over the trees now and just redefining the tops. I'm just trying to give them more of a point and a little variation to indicate that these are trees. I'm also trying to balance out the color too. There was more reds and warm tones on the right, and the balance just felt off to me. I'm moving on to the trees set in the middle ground. To make them appear closer, I'm using a more saturated color of my Terra Verte. Right now, my goal is just to have them appear closer to the viewer than the tree line in the background I just worked on. Since these trees are closer, there's going to be more detail, but the detail is going to be the contrast between the darks and lights. We can see more of the sunlight on these branches, still not individual branches, but clusters of leaves. I'm moving forward a little more and returning back to the lake itself. As I squint my eyes to look at the values, there's lights and darks caused by the soft waves on the lake. To achieve this ripple effect, I've wet the paper and I'm starting to just do horizontal strokes across the paper. The wet paper is allowing it to blend in and not have hard edges. All waves are a subtle gradation of colors. As the water gets close to the surface, it becomes more transparent or a lighter value due to the light shining through. As the water gets closer to the surface of the water, it's darker. Since the paper is still wet, I'm laying in some ground reflections. This is the vegetation color reflecting off the water surface. I use a more thinned down version of the vegetation color and pull the color left and right to indicate it's bouncing off the waves. I return back to the vegetation on the shoreline. Here is where I'm going to start blending in the hues I see, but not individual objects. Remember, the art of, well, art is to be a good observer and seer. I notice that the bottom of the vegetation is darker due to less light hidden underneath and the dark hues of the earth showing through. I'm not going to paint each individual tree that I see in the back and middle ground, but I do want to put a few in just to give it a look and also objects that say, yes, this clump of color is trees. Now I'm at a point where I can vary the heights of this tree area a little more. Since the clump of color signifies the trees farthest in the distance, these individual trees begin to create some more depth, and is achieved by some taller trees amongst the smaller trees. The variation of trees in the distance now have a darker value. I can't let this middle ground area be the same or lighter, or else it will push the objects back. To keep bringing them forward, I use more pigment and also some blue to the green to darken it up. I begin to work on the shadow reflection some more. After I lay in the more pigmented color, I dip my brush in the water and apply it to the edges to soften them up. So far, I've neglected the foreground area. It's time to add in some different values of greens on the ground area just to tell the viewer that the land is not flat. It's also the time I can start adding in individual objects due to this lake grass and weeds being the things closest to the viewer. Things in the foreground always appear to have more detail. This helps give the illusion of depth. The final detail I'm going to add to this middle ground vegetation is some parallel vertical lines just to signify some, and I mean some, of the individual grass shapes. There's something that's peaceful about just being out here and painting. It allows a time for my brain to just think of things rather than being distracted by the normal distractions of everyday life. There's also a peace that falls over you by hearing the sweet sounds of nature, even when nature is being silent. You don't experience the hustle and bustle of everyday life out here. Instead, it's just a time to almost slow down time. I'm at a stopping point for today. I think I'm done, and the way that I know I'm done is I'm starting to put in a lot more detail than what I wanted to. And when I do these plein air videos, I don't want to be just like I'm in a studio worrying about the minute details. Instead, just kind of capturing the impression of where I'm at. It is a beautiful location out here, so if you ever get a chance and you're in Lakeland, Florida, come on out to Colt Creek State Park and visit one of my favorite places, the Mac Lake.